Welcome again to a study of the ancient prophet Daniel. And we come today to chapter 6 of this great and precise prophecy about a coming Messiah and how history was developed by God to bring His Son into the world. Daniel has a lot to say to us about how that history unfolded. And in the middle of it, in chapter 6, we have a time when Daniel himself was nearly put to death, or at least they tried to put him to death. My name is Keith Mosher. I'm one of the instructors at the Memphis School of Preaching. We are televising in the studios of the Gospel Broadcasting Network, a wonderful work, a great work of the Churches of Christ, and we're so grateful for this work. And these kinds of programs go all over the world. And I hope you'll tell your friends that they can study any of the book of the Bible now on Gospel Broadcasting Network. And certainly I hope they will join us in this study of Daniel. And as I said just a moment ago, we've come to Daniel chapter 6. Now in this chapter, we're going to read about Daniel being promoted to a position of power under under a king named Darius. And this made the other leaders in that empire, the other governors and satraps, very jealous and angry at Daniel. And so they conceived a plan to try to get him into trouble. They couldn't find anything that he did that was disloyal to the king or anything that was immoral or anything else about Daniel. So they devised a plan that the king would enact a law that people had to pray to him for a certain time. Well, they knew Daniel couldn't do that. And Daniel always prayed to his God, our God, the living God, 3 times a day with his windows open. Well, they knew that. And so they saw him praying to his God during the time that he was supposed to be praying to the king, and he is arrested, and Darius has to follow the law because it cannot be broken. The law of the Medes and Persians cannot be broken. And so this Mede, this king of Persia, has Daniel thrown into a den of lions. And so I call this chapter God, the Lord of the lions, because God removes Daniel in a safe way from that pit of lions, and Darius has the other satraps and governors thrown in there, and the animals immediately devour them and so on. And that's really a synopsis now of this chapter. And let's outline it as we get started here in our study of chapter 6 of Daniel. Let's talk about the promotion of Daniel. That will be chapter 6. Chapter 5, verse 31 through chapter 6, verse 3, because we're told about Darius the Mede in the very last verse of chapter 5. And Darius the Mede took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. We'll have to talk about who that Darius the Mede is in a little bit later discussion. So the first 3 verses of this chapter 6 and the last verse of chapter 5, we are told about Darius, who promotes Daniel to this high position in the kingdom, in the empire. Then in verses 4 through 9, we're going to read about that trap that the other governors and satraps set for Daniel. That's verses 4 through 9. Then we're going to read how they sprung that trap, verses 10 through 18. And then we're going to read that plan of theirs backfired. And that's the rest of the chapter, verses 19 through 28. And so we're going to look now at chapter 6 and the promotion of Daniel. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom. That's a verse that really doesn't belong to chapter 5. In my opinion. It belongs to chapter 6. In the Aramaic Bible, in fact, it begins an entirely new chapter with a new purpose. It doesn't say that Darius received the kingdom the night Belshazzar died. It doesn't really say it that way. And so we don't really know when he got this governorship of this part of Babylon, of the ancient Babylon. He was given that position by Cyrus, and he becomes the satrap or governor of this area that Cyrus had conquered. The verse does introduce us to a man who has uncertain identity outside of the Bible. What we know of him is that his father, according to Daniel 9:1, is called Ahasuerus. He's a Median. He's not fully a Persian, but he is from that area of the world. He's a Mede, verse 9, verse 1. He was king of the realm of the Chaldeans, as I've just said. He was sort of a governor of this area of the ancient Babylon that Cyrus took. Now he's 62 years old when he takes this reign. We'll talk in just a few minutes about who this might be. But let me give you a background here that will help us lead up to this chapter. Let's talk about the mid-6th century before Christ. And this is the time in history when Cyrus united or merged the Medes and conquered Lydia and Belshazzar. That's 539 BC. The British Museum has a clay artifact. It's called the Cyrus cylinder. It gives us his record of how he conquered Babylon. You remember that Cyrus was named by Jeremiah and Isaiah as the one who would allow the Jews to go home from Babylonian captivity. And those two named him, well, Jeremiah a century and a half before Cyrus was born, and Jeremiah a century before Cyrus was born, and Isaiah a century and a half before it happened. So quite a prophecy. By name now. It must have amazed Cyrus when he picked up the Jeremiah scroll, Ezra 1 and 2, and saw his name there as being the one who would let the Jews go home. That cylinder discusses Nabonidus, the father of Belshazzar. And the cylinder says that Nabonidus imposed a ritual that was improper to the Babylonians. The god of Nabonidus was called Sin, sin. What Cyrus seems to be indicating on that cylinder is that he thought that Nabonidus, that Babylonian king, had tried to eliminate worship to Marduk, the king of the gods, to Cyrus. Well, Cyrus summarized that Nabonidus continued to do evil against Marduk's city. Well, the cylinder also contains Cyrus' description of himself. And on that cylinder, he calls himself the king of the world, the great king, the mighty king of the four corners of the world, the son of Cambyses, great king, king of Anson, grandson of Cyrus, great king, king of Anson, descendant of Telsipa, great king, king of Anson of an eternal link of kingship, whose rule Marduk and Nabu love, whose kingship they desire for their heart's pleasure. Well, I have an idea. Cyrus is bragging quite a bit about himself, don't you think? And when he would go into an area, instead of thinking of himself as a conqueror, he thought of himself as a liberator of these people. He's going to bring them under his control. Quite a cunning warrior, wasn't he? He was appointed, he said, by Babylon's own God to do so. Well, he also was appointed by God to do something. Cyrus co-opted the religious beliefs of the people he conquered. This is a practice of Catholicism, in fact, to incorporate the rituals and superstitions of the people that they teach. he actually returned the idols to their original places in Babylon when he went in there. And so he had a kind of cunning about how to keep people under control. And so we're told that he conquered Babylon. That's 539 BC now. But he will not allow the Jews to return until about 536 BC. And nearly 50,000 Jews do take advantage and go home to Palestine. 70 years after they had been taken, many of them, into captivity in 606 BC. Now this Darius the Mede, it's a title, Darius is. I'm not convinced that's a name, because the word means royal one, Lord. This is probably Evaru, who was appointed by Cyrus as governor over the former Babylonian empire that Cyrus conquered. The last clay tablet that refers to Evaru has him in office. And he has him in office up to 525 BC. And we know from those records of the Babylonians that a Darius set up a two-tiered bureaucracy to assist him, governors and satraps. That's what the Bible says. The Nabonidus Chronicles record this fact. And the Nabonidus Chronicles call these assistants sub-governors. Let's read again verse 2. And over these three presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give account unto them, and the king should have no damage. Well, we not only have the Bible record, we have an outside reference to this very thing. Daniel is still one of three presidents, note: Cyrus, Ebaru, or Darius, and Daniel, in my judgment. According to the Nabonidus Chronicles, there were 120 of these administrators. The Hebrew word translated president is only used by Daniel. It means something like a chief or an overseer. Kings had come and gone in Babylon. Who's still there? Daniel. That this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Well, that makes all the other folks jealous, doesn't it? Daniel excelled among the Persians, and he's ready for promotion. Just as when he was a young man, he found his way to the top of the list in this place where he is actually a captive, a prisoner, and yet third in line of power in the Persian kingdom. Well, the 120 are enraged now. Let's read verses 4 and 5 of Daniel 6. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Maybe we can trap him. How long it took for this conspiracy to take place after Daniel was promoted, we're not told. But Daniel had had sufficient time to prove himself. And we have some men here now who are biased. Daniel's a Jew. He's not a Mede. What's he doing leading us? You see their attitude? Such bias is not honorable. And they're not honorable. Were they prejudiced? Yes. And against Daniel's God? Yes. Were they envious? Yes, because Daniel was favored by Darius. Were politics involved? Absolutely. Daniel was getting ahead. They were not. Well, the two who are co-presidents are involved in the plot. Let's read verse 5 again. Verse 6. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said that thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. They have no legal reason to do anything to Daniel. So what are they going to do? They have figured out that they could get Daniel because of his devotion to his God, as they called God, Daniel's God. These pagans, let's think about it. These pagans knew Daniel's faith. That's interesting to me. Here was a man devoted to God, and they could see it. We're told by our Master that they may see our good works and glorify our Father which is in heaven. Who may see them? The world. Well, here's an example of a man, Daniel, who lived in such a way that those pagans could see he was devoted to God. I find that challenging. We're told that if we'll love one another, the world may know that we're His disciples. The world can see something in us when we love one another as disciples. There are so many passages in the Scriptures about our light before the world. Philippians 2:15, blameless in this world. John the Baptizer was of that ilk, blameless, John 1:4 and 5. Of course, the Master was without sin before the world, and He didn't come into the world to condemn it, John 3:17 through 20. But again, we are salt, we are light, Matthew 5:13 through 16. We're not supposed to do something to cause God to be reproached among the world, 1 Peter 2:13. In fact, an elder must be of good report from those that are without. 1 Timothy 3:1 through 7, Titus 1:5 through 9. Without reproach, above reproach. That's an interesting challenge for all of us when it comes to the world. Daniel was of such a character that those pagans took very good notice of it. I used to think that the devil went after my weaknesses. He's not that open. He's more subtle than that. He's devious. He'll go after what we think are our strengths. That's what he did to the Master. He said to him, "If thou be the Son of God." Matthew chapter 4. If that's who you are, make those stones bread. Jump off that tower. Look at those kingdoms, I'll give them to you. If. He went after the strongest point that Jesus had. He is the Son of God. And the devil attacked him right there. That's how devious Satan is. But this group of men now are going to attack Daniel at the very strongest point of his devotion. He prayed to his God 3 times a day. So they have a thought now. Let's see what happens. They've approached Darius, verse 6, and here's what they tell him, verse 7. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains, everybody says this, have consulted together to establish a royal law and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of a god or a man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Oh, boy, they have a plot, don't they? Now, we have to be reminded of something about the law of the Medes and Persians. Their law stated that the rulers themselves had to obey their own laws. If they made a decree, they were obligated to obey it to the letter. The law of the Medes and Persians cannot be broken. That was their motto. That was their law. That was their saying. Witness Esther. She married a Persian named Xerxes. Well, let's look at Esther's account here of what was going on. Now, remember, she's married to a Persian, and she knows the rule about going into a king under Persian law without having an invitation. And she could be put to death. We have to know that, or we won't get the import of this verse as it's stated here. This is 4:14. For if thou, and this is Mordecai, her uncle, speaking to her, he says, if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Esther, you've got to go in and talk to him about what this Haman has in mind about killing all the Jews. You're it. Well, in Esther 1:19, you remember there was one of the wives of this king who refused to come down when he commanded it, and they just got rid of her. If it please the king, let there go a royal commander from him, let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. If this woman won't obey the law of the king, kick her out. The law of the Medes and the Persians cannot be broken. And this thought is behind what we're reading here about these men who now want Daniel trapped, because they know he'll pray to his God 3 times a day. But they're talking Darius into making a law that for 30 days no one can pray to anyone or ask a petition of anyone except Darius. Well, that's kind of strange, isn't it? While I'm thinking about Esther, look at chapter 8, verse 8 of Esther. You talk about the law of the Medes and the Persians. Look at 8:8. Chapter 8. Write ye also for the Jews, if it liketh you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and seal with the king's ring, may no man escape. And so we are assured, fully assured, that when Darius makes this law, everyone will have to obey it or be thrown in to a den of lions. The Persian law was immutable. Well, let's see what happened. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, thus those satraps and governors, that it be not changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. I've often seen the President of the United States signing something into law, and he'll sign just a letter of his name and then hand that pen to someone as a memorial or a remembrance of that moment that the President of the United States used this pen to put his name on this decree. Well, here is the king, or the governor of this part of the old Babylonian Empire that now belongs to the Persians. His name is Darius, and he's signing this decree. And don't you know that the look on the faces of these who thought they now had Daniel was smug. We've got him. It's over now. Well, is it? Daniel knew the writing was signed. He saw it too. Or somebody told him. But he knows it. That's the law of the land. There is a principle for Christians right here when it comes to governmental law. And I'm going to suggest that Daniel does not deliberately set out to be an anarchist or disobey the law of the land. No. His entire lifetime habit was to pray to God, 3 times a day. And so he's not deliberately a revolutionist. He's a man of God. And when it comes to the government telling me, or you, Christian, that we cannot pray to our God, as we have always prayed to our God, we're going to have to tell the government what Peter told it. We ought to obey God rather than man, Acts 5:29. That principle is operative for all Christians. It's mandatory. After all, God established government. Government did not establish God. And when the government says, you can't do this, then it's the case that we're going to have to go ahead and do it. The chronicler, and I'm turning back to 1 Chronicles 21 right now, made a statement. This is Ezra now, and this is 1 Chronicles 21:30. But David could not go before it to inquire of God, for he was afraid because of the sword of the angel of the Lord. Wow. When God stops you, you stop. When God orders you, you obey. We ought to obey God rather than man. The psalmist commented on this particular difficulty, and I'm turning now to the 55th Psalm and the 17th verse. Psalm 55 is where I'm searching, and I'm looking at we ought to obey God rather than man. Psalm 55:17. For it was not an enemy that reproached me, then I could have borne it. Neither was it he that hated me that did magnify himself against me. Then I had hid myself from him. But it was then a man mine equal, my God and my repentance, mine acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked into the house of God in company. David is saying that he will not let anything stop him from worshiping his God. In the 8th chapter of 1 Kings, we are told the same principle. This is the 8th chapter of 1 Kings, and we're looking at verses 30, verse 30. And hearken thou to the supplication of thy servant and thy people Israel, when they shall pray toward this place, and hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, when thou hearest, forgive. Solomon is asking God, make sure that any time these people want to approach you, they can. In verse 44 of that same chapter, Solomon is recorded here, if thy people go out to battle against their enemy, whithersoever thou shalt send them, and shall pray unto the Lord toward the city which thou hast chosen, and toward the house that I have built for thy name, then hear them in heaven. And so Solomon is asking for what we always are sure, that we cannot let anyone stop us from praying to God. And so we ought to obey God rather than man. Daniel knows that. And so this isn't an act of anarchy or revolution. This isn't just an act of, I talk to God 3 times a day. Government can't stop me. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, his windows being open in his room toward Jerusalem. He kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed, and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. Nothing new for Daniel. He was honoring the instructions of 2 of Israel's greatest kings, David and Solomon, to pray to heaven. How many of the conspirators found Daniel doing this? We're not told. It just says in verse 11, then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. You know, they'd been hiding somewhere, had to be, watching him to catch him. Then they came near and spake before the king. Oh, here come the tattletales. Wow. The enemies of God. And they tell Darius about the king's decree. Did you not just sign a decree that people can't pray to anyone but you for 30 days? That every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? Now Darius knows he signed that. Their viciousness, their evil viciousness, I have seen multiple times in human beings who just loved when somebody else that they envied, that they didn't like, was hurt. I have witnessed something in recent days that I never would have expected to see in this country. But there are people in this country full of joy because the CEO of a health company was murdered, shot in the back by a coward. And yet they're just laughing about it. They're just so full. Well, they charge us too much, for health care, so he had it coming. There's no difference between that attitude and the attitude of these governors. It's evil smugness because they envy this Daniel. The king answered and said, the thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Now watch. Then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, which is of the sons of the captivity of Judah, he's not one of us, regardeth not thee, O king. Well, they don't know that. They just lied there. Nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself. Oh, what have I done? He loves Daniel. He's going to show that while Daniel's in the den of lions. He loves Daniel. But now he's upset with himself. Why did I sign that decree, you see? And set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. The king stayed up all night trying to figure out how he could get Daniel out of this problem. The formal charge has been made, though. Daniel, one of the exiles, did this. Then these men assembled unto the king. That would be the next day, or that evening, and said unto the king, know, king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute with the kingdom shall be changed. And so the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him in to the den of lions. Before he's thrown in, the king says to him, Daniel, your God will deliver you. Darius knows now that his subordinates had tricked him. His understanding he knows now was not correct when he signed that decree. He knows it. But he can't put an end to the conspiracy. Why? As we've already showed from the Bible, Darius is committed to the supremacy of law and order. No mercy here. Brother Turner in class told us that liberals regard as incredible that such a law as recorded here would be enacted, or that rebels would be thrown into a den of lions. And there are areas on the internet now. Was there really a den of lions? The Bible says so. Well, archaeology shows us that the Persians worshiped fire. And the 3 boys, you remember, were thrown into the furnace of fire. And we're also told here that Darius worked all day long trying to figure out a way to free Daniel. No avail. Brother Good wrote in his commentary, the ancient writer Diodorus, Library of History, realized the binding nature of Persian law. He told of an emperor from time of Alexander who regretted an act but could not change it. Well, we have a similar situation now in our text. And Darius is not the king, the mighty king, the great king Cyrus, is he? He would have had to answer to Cyrus if he didn't go through with this decree. Cyrus would not have allowed even a high official as Darius, Ibaru, to vacate a sacred vow, a law. And also, now Darius knows for sure what these subordinates really think about him. They don't have any respect for him. And so Daniel is arrested and thrown into the den of lions. And not only that, they take a stone and seal up the den itself. Verse 17. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own ring and with the ring of his lords. Oh, they got to sign it too. Those governors and satraps got to put their rings on it too. Their involvement in the attempted murder of Daniel is signed by their own rings. Daniel, I hope your God will save you. In fact, the English Standard Version has that Darius held out hope that Daniel's God would deliver him. As Nebuchadnezzar, Darius knew about the Jews' God, but he didn't know the Jews' God. The stone was impressed with the rings of Darius, the presidents and the other conspirators. Kyle said in his commentary on Daniel that it was an Oriental custom here that the sentence was carried out on the evening of the day the accusation was made. Well, that's what happened here. Kyle further says the stone was a flat one. I don't know how you knew that. If that's the case, the rings would have been diamond to press into that stone. That's my opinion anyway. Now, then the king went to his palace and passed the night. He never went to sleep. His friend is in a den of lions. What's he going to do? He can't sleep. And he put him in the den. I mean, he ordered him there anyway. But he can't sleep. He didn't have any music brought in, which would have been a way to help him go to sleep, I guess. But he didn't go to sleep that night. Now, Darius is up all night. Brother Turner had an interesting take on Darius. In fact, he wrote it in his commentary, but he told us in class the same thing. He said, now, Darius was a man of sterling character who held Daniel in high esteem. Well, secular character maybe. And Darius did hold Daniel in high esteem. I mean, if you're staying up all night worrying about a fellow that you had to order to be thrown into a den of lions, you've got to have a great admiration for the man that was thrown into the pit. And so we have a man here who's the governor, if you please, of an entire section of the new Medo-Persian Empire, the section that used to belong to Babylon, and he has a huge territory under him. A whole lot of folks, up to 120, according to the Nabonidus cylinder, under him, including Daniel. And he stays up all night because of one? Yes. He cannot sleep. In fact, Darius was so worked up about this situation that the next morning he doesn't send a servant to the lion's den. He goes himself. I want to talk about that lion's den. It had the essence of a cistern, funnel-shaped, dug out of the ground, had a small opening above, which could be covered by a stone. That's Kyle's take on this den. I would think that no stone was usually necessary. There was one this time. That seems to me to mean that these satraps and governors wanted to make sure he couldn't escape, that Daniel could not get out. It reminds me of the Roman government putting a stone over the tomb of Jesus. They don't want him out of that tomb because he said he was going to come out. And so they had the tomb with a stone over it and sealed. And so I know they didn't take the body because they wanted it right there where it was. The pit, according to Genesis 32:24, into which Joseph was thrown, was a cistern. Maybe that's what this is. The mouth of a used cistern was usually covered by a stone. Genesis 29:3, Lamentations 3:53. So we have 3 verses of Scripture, 2 from Genesis and 1 from Lamentations, that show us that there was a cistern when it was used that would be covered by a stone. Is that what this pit is? Well, critics mock this, that 122 satraps and families could be thrown into such a thing, because that's what happens to them. Well, they mock it. The text doesn't say how many were involved here. The critic is saying that it's all 122. We don't know that. We just know that there was a group involved in this. And it didn't tell us either in this text. It won't tell us in this text how long it took them to throw all of them in there. So how can you criticize something you don't know? That's what critics do, you know. There is no external evidence that I know anything about on how the ancients would construct a lion's den, but they knew how to do it, I'm sure. Well, let's read now from verse 20 of Daniel 6. Now, it's the next morning. Darius has been up all night, worried about Daniel down there in that lion's den. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God whom thou servest continually able to deliver thee from the lions? Are you okay, Daniel? Are you all right? Did you notice what Darius said here? Oh, let the servant of the living God. That's an interesting admission. He's the ruler of the affairs of men. Well, Darius had knowledge of Nebuchadnezzar, maybe, probably. And Nebuchadnezzar had to learn that the Most High rules in the affairs of men. Whether he understood that God or not, he knew that was the case about this one. I don't believe Darius converted here. That's not the case. Their attitude toward the gods of the nations was interesting. But the predicate, the living God, is connected to the fact that they have historical records now of the preservation of life, especially Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who walked out of a flaming furnace. Darius knows that. This is the God who preserves life. But that's all he is to Darius. And so when he says, the servant of the living God, he's indicating the possibility of Daniel's lives being preserved. And it's probably the case that previous conversations with Daniel about God would have led him to say that. When we read Psalm 42:3, or 70 verse 3, or 74 verse 3, or 1 Samuel 17:36, and so on, you get a sense of the attitude of the pagans toward the living God. And you start understanding, they thought of the God of the Jews as the one who's able to preserve life. Not that he's the only God, but he's the one who preserves life. Well, that's how Darius refers to Daniel's God here, and calls Daniel a servant of that one. Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. I almost can imagine Darius jumping up and down with delight here. But I want you to note Daniel's respect for this pagan king. We ought to pray for those in authority, kings, 1 Timothy 2:2. Need to have a good attitude as a Christian toward people in authority. Pray for them. When I read here that when Darius got to the pit, he used a lamentable voice, I'm reading about fear, anxiety, a stricken conscience. What have I done? I put this man in a lion's den. Well, Daniel, who is the statesman, you remember, says, watch, my God, this is verse 22 now, has sent his angel and has shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me, for as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. An angel of God saved me. I don't know if this is the same one who was in the furnace with the boys. What do you think? I know Good does in his commentary think that. That's a possibility, I'm sure. We're told that the angels are God's ministers. And Daniel says that his innocence is the reason that this happened. Not that he earned it, but he was the kind of a person that God could help, that God could look at him favorably. And I'm reminded of David, and when he wrote, this is Psalm 34:7, and David wrote, the angel of the Lord encampeth round about them that fear him and delivereth him. And so God's providential protection, here a miraculous protection, was done through an angel. In that same chapter of 34 of Psalm, verse 8, O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in him. Daniel professed his innocence. He had not transgressed then the law of the Medes and Persians. If he's innocent, he didn't transgress their law. Wait a minute. They said, don't. Wait. Learn something here, brothers and sisters. The highest ethic is always the right, the highest good. And the highest good is to obey God rather than man. Therefore, Daniel never, not in God's sight, never, not in God's sight, did he transgress that edict of the Persians. Oh no. He obeyed God. And that's always the higher ethic. It always will be. The midwives in Egypt showed us that. Rahab showed us that. And what happened to her. And the cross itself shows us about the highest good. The law of Moses said you cannot put an innocent one to death. Christ was innocent and put to death under the law of Moses. Did he violate the law of Moses? No. The highest good, folks. That's your high ethic. It always will be. I want to do what God wants me to do rather than what men want me to do. Daniel had not even been injured, according to what he said, I have done no hurt. When they threw him in there, he wasn't hurt either. And so not only did the lions not bother him, he wasn't hurt by being thrown in there. Daniel related, I trusted God. And because of that, I have not been hurt. Not by faith alone, folks. Of course not. Now watch. Then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. In Daniel's statement, I am innocent. Why? Because I did what God told me to do. Your law means nothing when I obey God. I obeyed God. I wasn't concerned about the satraps or the governors or the king's decree. But evil put a spin on the king's decree, didn't it? In order to attack an innocent person. And brothers and sisters, if you will take a long look at today's politics, you'll see the same activity of attacking innocence by putting a spin on it. When I obey God, man's decree means nothing. Darius also has a cruel side, watch. And if he's of sterling character, I wonder about this. But anyways, he has a cruel side. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel. We're not told how many now. And they cast them into the den of lions with their children and their wives. Wow. Their families paid a price for their evil. And the lions had the mastery of them, break all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. And the moment they got in there, they were dead. False accusers. Under the law of Moses, the false accuser suffered the penalty of the result of the accusation. If the person he accused were innocent and not guilty, the false accuser was paid the penalty. Deuteronomy 19, 16 through 21. You know, God hates those who sow discord, those who are false accusers. David was Daniel's ancient grandfather, great, way back. That means Daniel was a descendant of Hezekiah and Zedekiah, which Josephus says was the case. And so in verse 24, Daniel is alive. Why? Seed line. Now, what did Darius do? Exactly what Xerxes did in Esther's case. He issues a decree on top of the other one. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell on all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, the one who preserves life, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. A new edict. This is what Nebuchadnezzar had done previously. And he directly quotes from Nebuchadnezzar, chapter 3, verse 29 of Daniel. Daniel is about 84 years old now. I don't read ever in his lifetime that he ever complained to God. I don't read in his lifetime he ever married. I know he had always heathen audiences and heathen kings with whom to deal. But the Babylonians and the Medes and the Persians were learning about Daniel's God. Isn't that amazing? Darius' edict is still polytheistic. He's only requiring respect for Daniel's God, not the only God. The Persians tolerated all the gods because they advertised themselves, as Cyrus did, as liberators. And here's Daniel now again, prospering in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. God's providence prevailed forever in captivity. If Daniel was somewhere around 15 to 17 when he was captured, this is the 67th year of his captivity in 539 BC. And he survived because the Lord of the Lions took him out of the pit. Darius, polytheistic. Daniel serves the living God. And God rescued Daniel from the pit of lions. Never grow.